Sergey Karaganov is well known to you. He is a doctor. Was a candidate in his dissertation for the USA and Canada Institute of Moscow. He worked for 10 years within the institute, and since 1988 he became the deputy director of the founded Institute of Europe at the Academy of Sciences in Moscow. And since 2006, he is the dean of the School of International Economics and Foreign Affairs of the National Research University, the HSE, the Higher School of Economics. Sergey Karaganov I met first in London. I think it was in 89 or 90, when we have had a conference mainly along the same lines as we are discussing today. Sergey was named in the middle of the 90s as one of the most foreign policy experts of Russia. He was mentioned among the leading ranks of 100 public intellectuals, according to this survey, and he is known to us by many meetings he attended in Germany and in Europe, by publications which have been translated into many languages. And of course, he was one of the brains behind the Waldai Club initiative, which brings together experts all over the world in Russia on talking about issues as well, which we are talking about at the moment. Please, Sergey, you have the floor.
Thank you, Peter. It is a delight to be here. I must say that, Peter, you are by luck, by wit, you have created a very interesting opening panel, because we do not disagree. But we really look at the same subject from different angles, and I was asked to do that from a Russian angle. I mean, Richard did it more from a European traditionalist angle, and of course John Mearsheimer from an American, but we are all hardcore realists. I'm even more realistic, if for that possible, than John. I mean, I'm hard-hitting realist. And I have a vantage point. Both of my speakers represent unhappy entities geopolitically. United States and Europe. I am representing a happy entity, Russia. Russia, for the first time since 1814, feels itself good and is willing to play an active role, maybe not that crucial as in 1815 in Vienna, but nevertheless an active role in building up their future order. Of course, I mean, John Mearsheimer gave us, I mean, the very excellent description of what we have passed. But the bipolar world was, from a Russian point of view, a very unpleasant one. It was a tripolar in Russian, because we had to confront not only economically powerful West, but also China. And Russia was in an extremely bad geopolitical position through most of 30 years of Soviet Union, of its history. Unipolar world was, of course, was a second part, and it was called international liberal order. And here it's only one point where I would disagree with John Mearsheimer. It was international, yes, but it was not liberal and it was not order. For several reasons. One, liberalism is not imposing something on somebody; it's freedom of choice, and it was imposing. And the West tried to impose its ideology, its way of running economy, its geopolitical might on others. Inevitably, it failed, but others didn't like it. So, and they like what is happening now. And it was, so it wasn't a liberal, it was a liberal. It was a liberal in another sense, economic, but then I will touch that point too. And it was not order. It was complete disorder. It was bandits' paradise. Listen, I mean, from a Russian point of view, we are friends now, and Hans-Dieter Henscher and is dead, and we adored him, and Helmut Kohl have passed away a few days. He was a great man, and I really cherish my acquaintance with him. But 2001, Germany recognizing two breakaway states of Yugoslavia starting, and then pushing European Union into recognizing these states against, and then the United States, against all thinkable international laws. It started, by the way, their Civil War. 86, first bombing of Yugoslavia, and then 99. I mean, that was an episode worth of a Nuremberg. Then, of course, Iraq. I mean, unbelievable, totally concocted story, and then invasion of a sovereign country, devastating. A country which is not very good, but nevertheless, I mean, killing in the end close to 1 million persons, and that calamity is not in our vision. Libya is a separate example, but even in between, there were several, a few attempts of regime changes, which almost inevitably and everywhere brought disaster to the countries involved. The last was, of course, Ukraine, which is still suffering from what has been offered and imposed on it. So it was disorder. And then, of course, it was, but on one point it was liberal. That is uneconomic. But we see that during the last several years, we are witnessing that those who created this liberal economic order are starting to undermine it. Just polarization of economic relations, usage of interdependence in one own's interests, or as knowing preventing of interdependence, positive interdependence, for example, between Europe and Russia, generated by flow of Russian gas and flow of European goods. We know that United States is undermining that from the beginning to the end, and to a certain extent successfully. And then, of course, the latest, sanctions which have become the new normality. It's not only sanctions about Russia. They are imposed on dozens of states, and they are never lifted, almost never lifted, very well. China is still living under sanctions from Tiananmen Square. So in addition to other objective reasons, I mean, we see that the global liberal economic order is also under very strong stress. I'm not saying that we are already in the stage of deglobalization, but we are closing to it. The question is how things will go from now, and it is not about Trump. Even before Trump, that was very obvious. Trump made a caricature of it, I mean, and showed it to the extremes, to the possible extremes. So Russia did not like that order too. It didn't like the order number one. It didn't like the order number two. And it has been saying that we didn't like it, but unfortunately we were weak. Or at first we had illusions, new political thinking. We were weak, self-imposed weakness, and maybe even stupid. But then maybe. But then growingly started to understand that it is not, this order is not in Russian interests. And we started to work systematically to change that order. The last try was exactly Putin's offer of 2-1-2-2. But after Iraq War, things started to change drastically. And in addition, of course, China rise came from below and gave an additional impetus to Russian effort. By 2008, and especially in 2008, many, I wouldn't say, many, Russians came to a conclusion that this order should be dismantled, and it would lead to big war, because mostly of the expansion of the Western alliances, which were greedy, thoughtless, and would have led to a big war in Europe automatically. It was in 2008 when Russia started military reform, which made it again into a first-class military power. People are saying that everything changed in 2014. Probably for those who looked from outside or who didn't want to acknowledge the reality, it changed in March 2014. But for a Russian like myself, everything was absolutely predictable. In 2012, 2013, looking where things are going, and also witnessing the increasing hostility of the West, which saw the growth of Russian assertiveness. By the way, in 2013, this hostility was total. Not a single article in German press positive about Russia. I was telling my liberal friends, be ready for a confrontation. I didn't know whether it would happen. Crimea, I am happy, because otherwise it would have been Kyiv or another capital of Europe. But it was a preemption of a big war. And that was a success. So we have changed the balance of power in Europe immediately, and gradually in the world. At the same time, by stopping the expansion of the NATO by the Western alliances, unfortunately by an iron fist, not by argument. We used a possibility of an argument. We have stopped that part of the Western expansion, which as I said, was completely illegal because it was imposing spheres of control and influence on the other side, even sometimes with acquiescence, or many times, acquiescence of the countries which were co-opted, sometimes without acquiescence, by the way, too. But we could deal with that further, or without the acquiescence of the societies of these countries. So at the same time, moving to Syria, Russia has done again a very large contribution to the future world order, because in Syria it stopped the regime change practice of the West. Assad could be there a year from now, or he would get there, get out of there a year from now. But the practice of regime change and humanitarian interventions used for geopolitical reasons is over. That has happened. So we are winning, and also so we used to be the weak, defensive, neo-Weimar country. When now we are winning, looking at much more benevolent at our friends in Europe and elsewhere, even in the United States. I mean, so we know, of course, about our weaknesses, but in addition to what has happened there, changing our the balances between vis-a-vis the West, Russia has moved towards a close political alliance with China. It is very close, and it could be even an effective economic alliance. But I mean, fortunately, we have rejected so far the offer of unlimited resources. But we know that in our competition with the West, we could count on China. The China is growing, and it knows that in its confrontation with the United States, hopefully it will not be a confrontation, it will be competition. It could count on Russian strategic and political might. It's an unbelievably good combination. It's even better than US or European. And I do not see any reason why we should break in the foreseeable future that kind of a de facto alliance. So does that mean that Russia, China, and the like, there are many Russias, Chinas in the world, India in its own way, countries of ASEAN, Indonesia's, etc., and many, by the way, growingly within the West, would like to change that kind of order too. The revolution against the elites is about their not revolution or rebellion against the elites, which is called populism. But populism, in modern parlance, as democracy, which went from under control of elites. And so that revolution or rebellion or whatever will change also the situation. Is changing the situation in the West. Even if Donald Trump becomes conventional, which is hard to believe, or else he is ousted, which is also hard to believe, or else if he goes away, which I think is a possibility, he'll say, "Go to hell, America! I'm going to Trump Tower." And anyway, I mean, the change has happened. Really? Yes. The change has happened, and it will be happening. So where from now? And as I've said, most of the changes, in spite of insecurity, instability, and unpredictability of the situation, from a point of view, and even from point of view of international scholar, I mean, without a nationality, is much more promising than it used to be 30 years ago, 15 years ago, because it has very positive creative elements in it. So where to go? I think that probably, I haven't mentioned one thing, which is also, of course, very important, that this change of the balance of power was not imposed by Russia or China. It was a result of objective forces within the societies of the West, and of course the result of our extension of the European Union, and which resulted in this present crisis. You know that better than I do, or inability to act, and of course by terrible mistakes done by the United States. It was self-imposed. I mean, going to Afghanistan with the land force unexplainable, going to Iraq and losing politically the war. Then having several other setbacks, and then finally objective situation with the 2008-2009 economic crisis, which gave a powerful blow to the moral authority of the old West. There are still elements of the old order, and many of them should be preserved. I hope that the European Union, and we'll discuss that later, will return to a little bit to the base and survive. There are very visible possibilities, and whether, of course, European elites are able to do that, I do not know. We'll see in our discussion. NATO is weakened, but it is still a structural force, and I think that basically, even when we overcome this attempt to return to the bipolar confrontation, which is behind NATO policies now, and some NATO policies now, and behind the Ukraine crisis, we could, through military dialogue for a while, we could find some kind of a positive role for NATO too. because in a situation of growing instability within Europe, which is possible, you'd better have NATO there. Not because of Russia NATO, because the whole idea of Russia and threatening NATO or NATO threatening Russia is an idiocy. But because, I mean, it's a structural element which keeps many demons under the table. And the UN is still there. OSCE could be reformed, though but of course, Alexei Andreevich will talk about that. I do not trust in the survivability of OSCE, but we could change it if it is changeable and use it for peaceful purposes. Eventually, a UN is still there. I mean, and I hope we shall discuss that later, but UN is, in spite of all its weaknesses, have proven itself to be the only viable international organization, in spite of all things for which it is criticized. So where to go? For Russia, it's clear. We have not only withstood the confrontation and won, we have turned east, both economically, this last year, and of course, finding a much better balance of our economic relations. Last year, economic trade with of countries of Eurasian Economic Union with Asia was larger than with Europe, and it gives us much more competitive advantage. The main effort is not only the change to the east, which has only started economic, but the mental change. Russia has used, since Peter the Great, was a fringe European power, trying to get into Europe. I mean, and Richard and others, and described the last attempt of Gorbachev. And now Russia is Eurasian. Some of us believe that we are real Europe, but geostrategically and geoideologically we are Eurasian, and Eurasian geostrategic and geoeconomic position is much more viable than a country, than a fringe country in Europe. Well, of course, the problems in Europe have contributed to that too. Confrontation to that contribute to that too. But the main change has been within Russia and within our understanding of the elite, where the world is going. So our great project, which we will be pushing together with China, hopefully together with Europe, is Greater Eurasia, based on absolutely different, instead of unfortunately defunct Helsinki-Paris system, which should be built, a community of nations which should be built on freedom of choice, liberalism. A multiplicity of cultures and political system instead of uniformity, which has been offered. Unquestionable respect for sovereignty of nation states. Respect for all nations' ways to develop their own identity and their own economic and political systems, and hopefully on more connectivity and economic cooperation. I think that basically that project which we are pushing towards with China and growingly with ASEAN, and hopefully in years together with the countries of Europe, or maybe with the European Union, is the project for at least Eurasia. The second, and of course for Europe, for larger Europe, because the old project for larger Europe has failed, and I don't think it could be restored, though of course I'm nostalgic. It could have been a nice place, and it could have been a nice system, but it didn't happen. And I don't want to put blames on some. We are also to be blamed for, as I've said, for our stupidity, including in our relations with Ukraine. But then there is, of course, the question of the greater global system, because there are instabilities, unpredictabilities, growing rivalry, including between United States and China, which is inevitable one way or another. Some unsolvable global problems which are building up while institutions are lagging behind or collapsing. Calls for some kind of a giant new project. At this juncture, I would agree with the likes of my intellectual teachers and great acquaintances, Henry Kissinger and late Zbigniew Brzezinski, who have been talking about the new concert of nations. It should be, of course, at the beginning, China, Russia, and the United States. China and Russia could not do anything without consent or participation of the United States. United States will be probably diminishing its relative power. The global problems will build up. So if we sooner or later, maybe hopefully sooner, will start at first trilateral conversation on international strategic stability, which includes strategic, conventional, cyber weaponry, and of course regional problems. We could gradually start to build something, a nucleus of a new order, maybe later joined by other sovereign and powerful nations. But of course, and they are clear, they are already there, Japan, India. The problem now, the only problem is that, and I don't have this, the solution for that problem is where Europe lies. Because Europe is, has a lot of moral authority, has a great economic power, but because of the structure of European Union, which diminishes or even kills the influence and power of nation states while not supplanting it by anything plausible, could not play an active role. And the European Union would not be the third or the fourth in a triangle or whatever configuration if it happens. I think things are going in that direction, and we should help. By the way, of course, these three nations like China, Russia, and the United States, with all the imbalances and growing imbalances, will be distrustful of each other. But there is one good thing which could help to cure these imbalances: nuclear weapons. If this relationship is built also on mutual and understandable and strengthened mutual deterrence, that could provide for a much more viable entity than otherwise. I must say that that's why I still believe that I'm in love with the Vienna concert. Read everything. I've participated in the remake of the Vienna concert of nations. But I think that the future world will be moving in that direction, or else. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergey. I think you has given us a picture that probably Russia is one of the few countries who knows where to go. And when I pick up one of your last conclusions, a new triangle is emerging: Peking, Moscow, Washington. And the question is, where's Europe? I mean, this is a question which is haunting us as well. The only issue in this in the context of your description is you're speaking about an alliance between Beijing and Moscow. Training speaks about an entente, a community of interest.
It is an alliance.
Yeah, it is an alliance. An alliance without ideology, not based on institutions, on shared interest.
No shared interest.
On shared interest. Okay. So let's go into the discussion, but I propose the following. Let's first have a coffee. Yeah. Okay.
Good.
Are you agreeing? Good. Then let's shorten the coffee break a little bit so that we have time for the discussion and we don't run into problems with time. Thank you very much for your attention.